Okay, like I mentioned before, RJSpeed spec 10. Let's pull this out of the box. Looks like there's packing material down in there. There's the stock car body that comes with it. Like I said, I won't be using that on this particular build. But all in all, it's not a bad body. It's a very thin, lightweight body. So we'll see how that goes. Alright. We have the front wheels and foam tires. Rear wheels and foam tires. And inside all this packing is the kit itself. Go ahead. Where'd I put my scissors? Let's get this out of here and see what we've got to work with. A bag with all the rear end components. Got the bronze bushings for the rear axle. I may have to start with those because I don't know if the bearings I ordered for the rear axle are going to arrive before Saturday. Is the spindles and other front end parts, small springs, body mounts, and braces for the chassis. See, this is what they run, come in the kit for the steering. It's just a piano wire style steering. That's why I'm going to put turnbuckles on it. These are the parts for the damper on the rear end. It's a triangulated spring rod assembly for dampening the movement of the rear end. I don't know how well you can see it through the bag, but there it is. This is the base plate of the rear pod, and it is flexible so the rear pod can float as a separate suspended unit. And we have our basic. These are G10 fiberglass. It's all CNC cut. So let me get the instructions out of the bag and I'll get started assembling this, and I'll update you as we go.
Can't find the shirt.
The rear pod put together. You see the cutouts for the flex plate, allows the rear pod to move around. Okay, so I got the main chassis put together. Now the only thing you really need to pay attention to on this is there are two different diameters of screws. The screws that go into these plastic tubes are a 540 thread, and the screws that go into the fiberglass cross pieces, they're a 440 thread. Now they use the same hex wrench, but if you lay them all out and put them, you know, side by side where you can look at them, the 540s, which is one here, have a larger diameter head on them. The 440s is smaller diameter, and there's just a slight difference in the thread of the bolts. If you try to force a 540 into these areas, you're going to damage the material. And if you put a 440 into one of these cross braces, it's not quite going to grab. You can thread it in, but it's not really going to hold. So you just have to pay attention to that. Okay, I've gotten a little farther into this, and one thing that hasn't changed in 35 years is the steering spindle and plastic piece. The way it comes in the kit, it's a very snug fit. It's too restrictive. It won't float like it's supposed to. So 9/64 drill bit. Nice and free. Won't have any binding, and it'll work perfect. Just something to keep in mind when you're building one of these. Quick tip on when you're putting this chassis together, something to remember. Let's see if I can get this in the camera. These two little ball joints here, the instructions wait until after you have all this assembled to tell you to install those. It'd be much easier to install them before you put this plate into the chassis. I can see it. But just underneath there, there are some very tiny nuts. Let's see them from the back side if I can get it. You can see those two nuts in there. They're all but impossible to put in with the plate in the chassis, so I had to take these two screws out and loosen this up to be able to get this plate out and put that in there. So quick tip is to put these ball joints in before that plate is bolted into the chassis. Alright, here's another quick tip. These rods that act as the suspension for the rear end. When they come out of the bag, they're actually too long and they hit on the sides of the chassis. So you're going to want to cut them down so they're not making any contact with the chassis plate. They're only making the contact here and sliding through the brackets. You don't want them touching the chassis plate at all. That'll affect the way the pod moves. So keep that in mind. You're going to need to do that. Alright, now instead of using, where are they? Instead of using this piano wire and clamp setup for the steering, I'm using some turnbuckles, and I guessed on the length of the turnbuckles, and I'm not too far off. I'm pretty close on that. I'll be able to adjust them to where I need to get them, and what I used is I use the associated turnbuckles. I don't know if you can read that or not. But it is the 3x48 millimeter. Part numbers 91723. That's for the turnbuckles. And for the ball cups, they're just standard associated B6 ball cups. Bought the whole set. What I don't use on this, I can use for replacing on the breakout car. And for the servo saver, it is the Kimbrough medium. It's number 201, and it's a universal spline. It's got adapters to fit any servo you want it fitted on, and that's what we're using for that. Alright, so this is basically what it looks like with the turnbuckles installed. Got another one of these Apex servos. Inexpensive, great servo, love to use them. Because they're inexpensive, I don't mind doing this to it. The tabs on one side, I literally cut clean off. That way, move the servo all the way over, and that puts the shaft on the servo centered in the chassis. So I don't have this offset linkage system. And this looks like the extent of what I'm going to get done today. And we'll pick back up on this tomorrow. I need to take this motor and get it out of the package and get the brushes broken in and get it ready to install so I can put it in and then proceed to put in the back axle. And we'll pick up on this tomorrow. Okay, it's the next day, and working on a couple more things here you need to be aware of. First off, the motor screws that come with the kit, they're actually a little bit too long. So, I don't know if you can see that, but I went through my parts bin, found some spacers to space out the bolts a little bit. So that way I'm not burying the end of the screws into the magnets. And these inserts, plastic inserts that press into the side plate. They're a molded insert. Chassis is CNC cut. So there is some fitment issues. It is too tight to just press in. So I ended up having to use some sandpaper and some of my small files to open up the opening a little bit so that would actually fit into place. Here's a good tip for you. It'd be a good idea to go ahead and do that before assembling the chassis. That way you can make sure the inserts fit in these side plates for the rear pod before everything else is in place. It'd make it a lot easier for you. And you can see I've started putting some electronics in it. I went ahead and mounted the speed control to the left side of the chassis. But it's slowly coming together. And next I'll be getting into assembling the rear diff. So I'll be back with you in just a minute about that. All right. So got the rear diff assembled. And I'll give you a couple quick tips on that as well. Now the instructions will tell you as a tip to use super glue to glue the individual pieces where the diff rings meet on their plates and where the aluminum plate presses into here. But instead of doing that, I prefer to use just a very thin layer of the E6000 and press it all together, let it set up. That way I know that it's going to hold. It's not going to slip when I don't want it to slip, and at the same time I can get it back apart if I want to without having to heat it up or soak it in acetone. And the other thing is the kit comes with enough screws to put in 2 screws per wheel on the back wheels. I prefer to use all 4, so I used a 3mm tap, and I retapped all these holes for 3mm bolts, and I'm going to use the 3mm bolts to hold the wheels to the hubs. The last thing is the instructions say to put, I don't know if you can see it, but instructions say to put in the holes in this spur gear, they say to put a ball in every other hole. Well, I ordered extra balls, and that way I could put a ball in every single hole. Figures it'll work better that way. I know it will. That's what I've done in the past with this type of setup. So that's pretty much the extent of the chassis, and from here I've just got to get everything dialed in, get the body painted and installed, and I'll do the body in a separate video. But if you have any questions on these Spec 10 chassis, please just feel free to ask. Oh, and don't forget to give me the thumbs up. Thanks.